So let's start. Today we have the pleasure to have with us Aaron Batts. And Aaron, after teaching at the Catholic University of America, is now university professor for Semitic studies, in particular Ethiopic studies, at the University of Hamburg. He also leads the ERC project Consolidated Grant Beyond Influence, the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity. As I said, an ERC consolidated grant. And recently, he also took the leadership as a successor of Professor Alessandro Bausi of the Hiob Ludolf Center for Ethiopian and Eritrean Studies. He also is editor of the journal Ethiopica and of the series Ethiopische Forschungen. Today, he will talk of the relationship between Syriac and Ethiopic literature, and in particular of the Ethiopic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun. The talk there is a big contribution to the research, as Aaron will also said, of Ted Ero, a collaborator in his project, but I leave the word to Aaron, so he will explain more. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to speak in a TeTra seminar. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen now. Is this the correct direction?
It's still in present. We can see our presentation mode.
Always switches.
Beautiful.
How about that? Perfect. Okay. Thank you. So as Valentina mentioned, around this time last year, I began a major project at Universität Hamburg entitled BINF, Beyond Influence, the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity. If you want to get a sense of the project, you can visit our website that is listed there in the bottom left-hand corner of the slides. In my lecture today, I want to share with you some of the work carried out in the context of the BINF project, and in close collaboration with Ted Ero. In particular, I'll focus on a newly discovered Ethiopic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun and its implications for the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity. The life of Abraham of Kidun is attested in a variety of languages throughout the Christian world. The text was written in Syriac, probably in the 5th century, by an author who remains anonymous. At some point in its history, the text was attributed to Ephraim, but this attribution is spurious. At least 7 Syriac manuscripts attest the life of Abraham of Kidun, one of which you can see on the slide. The Syriac original was translated relatively soon into Greek, where it exists in different text types. Here I would point you to a very interesting hagiographic codex on papyrus housed in the Louvre, and the important monograph by Dr. Laurent Capron, who's here with us today. I would especially like to thank him for sending a copy of the monograph to me. From Greek, the text was translated into a number of languages. And here I come back once again to the name of Capron, this time an article focusing on the versional history of the text. A simplified versional history of the life of Abraham of Kidun is summarized in the stemma that you can see on the right of the slide. The Greek version was translated into Latin, where it exists in several different text types. It was also translated into Slavonic, where again, it seems to exist in different text types. A Christian Palestinian Aramaic translation of the Greek text also once existed, but only 3 fragments are now extant. And there's also a Georgian version of the life of Abraham of Kidun, and it's likely that it was a translation from Greek, though more work needs to be done in this area. In addition to these versions that are translated from Greek, there's also an Arabic version in Syriac script, that is Garshuni, that was translated directly from Syriac. The Arabic version is found in Manuscript Jerusalem Monastery of St. Mark 199. This manuscript contains a note stating that it was written at Deir Zafran by a monk from Aleppo named Bishara between February 1732 and January 1733. Like the Greek, but different from the other language versions, the Arabic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun is a translation directly from the Syriac original. So again, I give you a simplified form of the versional history of the life of Abraham of Kidun in the stemma on the slide. And again, I point you to the 2018 article by Capron for more details, especially on the multiple text types. Until now, an Ethiopic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun has remained virtually unknown. Nevertheless, Ted Eraho has in the last years identified 3 Ethiopic witnesses of a text attributed to Ephraim and entitled On the Life of Abraham II. And this is none other than an Ethiopic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun. Full credit should go to Ted Eraho for making this discovery. Eraho and I are currently preparing an edition of this text. In the present paper, I want to clarify how the Ethiopic witness relates to the other versional witnesses, and then consider the wider implications it has for the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity. First, however, a word on the Ethiopic witnesses. The oldest Ethiopic witness is EMML 7602, which you can see here on the slide. A note at the end of this manuscript names its commissioner, the ruler Dawit, who reigned from 1379 until 1413, and thus this manuscript can be firmly dated to that time. The manuscript is extremely large and it's written in an impressive 3-column layout. It consists of a hagiographic collection containing a wide number of saints and was actually much larger originally, as the first 2/3 of the codex are unfortunately now lost. Saints from Egypt as well as the broader Eastern Mediterranean are represented alongside Ethiopians. All the figures are, I believe, from late antiquity, and some of the texts are undoubtedly translations directly from Greek. This point's going to be important in a minute. As is illustrated on the slide with our Abraham of Kidun, each of the extant homilies, hagiographies, is accompanied by an illumination. The second manuscript to witness the life of Abraham of Kidun is EMML 7469. This is a much later manuscript on paper and can be dated to the early 20th century, as it was commissioned by Kasa Hailu, one of the most prominent Ethiopian noblemen of the era, no later than 1919. In his catalog of it, Eraho enumerates almost 50 texts, and so I obviously can't go through them in detail here. In addition, the matter is quite complicated, with Eraho suspecting the manuscript was copied from a number of different source manuscripts. In general, the texts are monastic and/or hagiographic. Most seem to be translated from Arabic, though there are a few native Ethiopic compositions. But one part of the manuscript, and importantly, the one in which our life of Abraham of Kidun is found, is full of translations from Greek made in late antiquity. A preliminary comparison of these 2 manuscripts suggests that they contain the same text type, but only a full collation and edition will establish the matter definitively. A different text type is found in a 3rd manuscript housed in Oslo. In his catalog, Eraho dates the manuscript to the late 15th or early 16th century. The manuscript contains 4 hagiographic texts, including our life of Abraham of Kidun, here called a Gedel, unlike in the other 2 manuscripts. As already noted by Eraho in his catalog, the text of the Oslo manuscript differs from that of the other 2 manuscripts, and it perhaps reflects a rewriting within the Ethiopic tradition. If so, this would be an example of the 5th locus of change in my typology of the transmission of text from Syriac into Ethiopic. You can see the article on the slide. So for now, this will have to suffice for a description of the manuscripts. But in the published form of the material, Eraho and I will provide more details about these 3 manuscripts, each of which is quite interesting, but for different reasons. I would now like to turn to the relationship of the Ethiopic life of Abraham of Kidun to the other versional witnesses. To frame the discussion, it will be useful to know something about the periodization of Ethiopic literature. Ethiopic literature is traditionally divided into 2 broad periods. The first is the period dating to late antiquity, which consists almost exclusively of translations from Greek, above all the Bible, not only the Septuagint in the New Testament, but also other texts, such as Enoch, Jubilees, 4th Baruch, and the Ascension of Isaiah, as well as other non-biblical texts. The second broad period of Ethiopic literature is the Solomonic, dating to the medieval period, which is dominated by translations from Arabic, but also includes native Ethiopic compositions. This paradigm for Ethiopic literature has recently been questioned, at least in part, based on new discoveries as well as on reconsiderations of long-known evidence. Nevertheless, for present purposes, a general division of Ethiopic texts into Aksumite on the one hand and Solomonic on the other is without problems. Given this history of Ethiopic literature, the Ethiopic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun can hypothetically fit into 3 different places in the stemma, which you see again on the slide. So the first option, it could be a translation in the Aksumite period directly from Greek, which in turn was translated from Syriac. So if you can see my cursor from Greek, we would have a new node of Ethiopic here. The second option, it could be a translation from Arabic in the Solomonic period with the Arabic forelogge going back to Greek, which in turn was translated from Syriac. So the second option, Syriac, Greek, we would have to have an Arabic node here and then an Ethiopic node down there. Third, it could be a translation from Arabic in the Solomonic period with the Arabic forelogge going back directly to Syriac, but not by way of Greek. So we would have to go this way, Arabic here or a different Arabic version that's not extant. At least 2 pieces of evidence suggest that the Ethiopic must have passed through Greek on its way to Ethiopic. First, the Ethiopic agrees with the Greek in omitting the name of the village Qidun. At the top of the slide, you can see the text of the Syriac original. According to Qidun, none of the Greek manuscripts provides the name of the village. I give you the text of Assamani's edition on the slide. The Ethiopic version follows the Greek tradition, as you can see on the slide. Thus, the Ethiopic version agrees with the Greek in the omission of the name of the village. An important leitfehler that it unites the Ethiopic version with the Greek version against the Syriac. Another leitfehler, which unites the Greek and Ethiopic versions against the Syriac, is found towards the end of the text. You can see the relevant Syriac text on the slide. According to Qidun, the underlined sentences are not attested in any Greek manuscripts. Qidun uses this omission in the Greek to argue that all the Greek witnesses go back to a single archetype. That is, in technical terms, the omission serves as a conjunctive error, uniting the Greek tradition. Quite importantly for us, the Ethiopic version shares this conjunctive error. Therefore, the Ethiopic must belong to the same textual branch as the Greek tradition. Thus, a trajectory directly from Syriac to Arabic and then on to Ethiopic must be ruled out. Only 2 possible trajectories remain for the Ethiopic. It could be a translation directly from Greek in the Aksumite period. Again, we're just going to put it here. Or second, it could be a translation from Arabic in the Solomonic period with the Arabic forelogge going back to Greek. So once again, we have to have Arabic here and then Ethiopic. In general, I think we should be careful, even very careful, in suggesting that an Ethiopic text stems from the Aksumite period. In the past, scholars have been far too eager to do so, in my view. Personally, I feel that the burden of proof should fall on proving that a particular text belongs to the Aksumite period, usually by showing that it was a translation directly from Greek, and that the default, until proven otherwise, should be post-Aksumite. My hesitation regarding an Aksumite date notwithstanding, however, I do think that there's evidence suggesting that the Ethiopic life of Abraham of Kidun was translated directly from Greek. The first point to make in this regard is that an Arabic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun is extant in the previously mentioned Jerusalem manuscript, Monastery of St. Mark 199. But this could not be the forelogge of the Ethiopic text. Recall, this Arabic version was translated directly from Syriac, and therefore it doesn't have the conjunctive errors shared by the Greek and Ethiopic tradition. And also, of course, the Arabic translation was made in the 1730s, several centuries after the 2 Ethiopic manuscripts were copied. Thus, the Arabic text in this manuscript is not the forelogge of the Ethiopic. In addition, the Arabic text in this manuscript is the only known Arabic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun. That is, there's no direct evidence for an Arabic translation of the Greek version of the life of Abraham of Kidun. So note there's no Arabic down here. There's no Arabic here in the stemma. It's important to mention that this does not resolve the matter in and of itself. There could have been an Arabic translation of the Greek version that's no longer extant, but that there's no evidence for it should at least pique our attention. The most convincing evidence that the Ethiopic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun was translated directly from Greek comes from the texts themselves. When one starts reading the Ethiopic text alongside the Greek, it immediately becomes clear that the Ethiopic is quite close to the Greek, and close in ways that would be impossible if Arabic stood between them. I want to say this again. Of crucial importance for us, some features of the Greek text are reflected in the Ethiopic version that would be difficult, if not impossible, if Arabic stood between them. So here I want to highlight just one, and that's the correspondence of the Ethiopic particle sa and Greek da. As I proposed in a recent article, the Ethiopic particle sa, just like Greek da, marks a change in topic, often contrasted, but not always. Very important for us, the Ethiopic particle sa is frequently employed to translate Greek da in Ethiopic translations from Greek and late antiquity. So I want to give you an example from the life of Abraham of Kidun. The Greek text reads, his parents, da, were pressuring him to have intercourse, and he, da, did not want this. I want to begin with the second da. This da marks a change in topic from parents to the pronoun autos, which refers to Abraham. And in this case, the change in topic is contrasted, so we could translate but. His parents were pressuring him to have intercourse in marriage, but he did not want this. Note also that the Greek sentence is headed by da, marking a change in topic from what came before. The Ethiopic is closely similar. For those who don't read Ethiopic, I provided a transcription, and all you really have to note is the placement of the particle sa, which I've underlined. Note that in Ethiopic, the contrastive change from parents to Abraham is marked with sa, just like Greek had da. In addition, Ethiopic has an extra pronoun, wa'etu, that is he, that one. Such a pronoun is not needed in Ethiopic, but it closely follows the Greek autos. But back to sa. Not only is the transition from the first clause to the second clause marked with sa in Ethiopic, just as the Greek is marked with da, but the Ethiopic sentence also starts with sa, just like Greek starts with da. For me, the Ethiopic really is exceptionally close to the Greek, and that both have their respective particles twice. It's difficult, at least for me, to imagine this happening by accident. What's more, this particular sentence is not exceptional, but representative of the text more broadly. That is, when one reads through the text, the vast majority of sas in Ethiopic are motivated by Greek da. It pushes the limits of plausibility to think that these correspondences are all just accidental. But why is this important? Well, because Arabic translations from Greek are not consistent in how they render Greek da, if they render it at all, which they often don't. This contrasts with the pronouns, if we go back to that topic momentarily. Remember, Greek has autos as the subject of the second clause. Ethiopic has wa'etu, an exact match. Thus, the Ethiopic could be translated from Greek. But it's also easy to imagine an Arabic intermediary here, with the pronoun hua, for instance. Hua means he, that. So in the case of the pronoun, we could not rule out an Arabic intermediary. Both options are possible. Translation directly from Greek or translation from an Arabic intermediary. The case is entirely different with Greek da and Ethiopic sa. I want to state it once again. Arabic has no regular and consistent way to render Greek da. Thus, the regular correspondence between Greek da and Ethiopic sa in the life of Abraham of Kidun shows that the Ethiopic was translated directly from Greek without an Arabic intermediary. So I offer you this revised stemma with the Ethiopic as a direct translation of the Greek. I'll just let you think about it for a minute. I now want to step back and consider the wider implications that the Ethiopic life of Abraham of Kidun has for the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity. Earlier approaches to the connected histories of Syriac and Ethiopic Christianity have been part of a broader scholarly project in the so-called Second Christianization of Aksum. This scholarly narrative acknowledged that Christianity reached Aksum by the middle of the 4th century, as is shown by the Aksumite ruler Ezana's coins with crosses, you can see one on the slide, as well as by Trinitarian language in one of his inscriptions. Nevertheless, the scholarly narrative of the Second Christianization maintained that the spread of Christianity in Aksum was actually due to the efforts of a group of foreign missionaries active in the late 5th or early 6th centuries, including especially the so-called 9 saints, You can see 8 of the 9 saints here on the slide. It's this supposed later spread of Christianity at the hands of foreign missionaries that's been dubbed the second Christianization of Aksum. Why does this matter? Well, very important for us. Several scholars, including most prominently Guidi and especially Conti Rossini, argued that these foreign missionaries were Syriac Christians. Based on this connection, a theory was developed that attributed a great deal of Syriac influence, I can't give enough scare quotes, to the development of Christianity in Ethiopia, including the introduction of monasticism, as well as the translation of the Bible into Ethiopic. The proposal of Guidi and Conti Rossini that connects the alleged foreign missionaries with Syriac Christians was based on 4 principal arguments that I've given on the slide. I'm not, however, going to read them for you, because all 4 of these arguments have been seriously challenged in subsequent scholarship. Starting with a foundational article by Polotsky in 1964, followed by 2 important articles by Marcini in the early 90s, as well as an article by Witkowski around the same time. I want to summarize the state of the matter, at least as I see it. It's going to be a strong statement. All the evidence that Guidi and Conti Rossini elicited to connect a purported second Christianization of Aksum to the missionary activities of Syriac Christians turns out to be illusory. I cannot stress enough that there is no Syriac connection here. The alleged involvement of Syriac Christians is a fictional, if not fanciful, invention of Guidi and Conti Rossini, based on erroneous evidence and invalid arguments. My BM project is not, however, primarily a project of historical deconstruction and minimalism. Rather, it aims to highlight the many contacts and connections between Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity that have unfortunately been overshadowed up to this point by the ill-fated hypothesis of Syriac involvement in an alleged second Christianization of Aksum. The Ethiopic version of the life of Abraham of Kidun is exactly one of these pieces of the puzzle that has been overlooked to date. And in fact, it's a very important one. If you accept my argument that the life of Abraham of Kidun reached Ethiopic directly via Greek, and I think the evidence is overwhelming, then we have a case of a Syriac text reaching Ethiopic already in late antiquity, even if via Greek. So I provide just a little context. A number of Syriac texts ultimately reached Ethiopic, but as a rule, they were transmitted via Arabic during the medieval period. This includes Ethiopic versions of works by Syriac authors such as Afrahat, Ephraim, Jacob of Saruk, Philoxenus, Isaac of Nineveh, Dadisho Katraya, John of Dalyatha, Theodore Barconi, Ishodat of Merv, and more. There are also a number of anonymous Syriac texts, including exegetical homilies, wisdom literature, and hagiography, to name only a few genres. You can find a preliminary inventory of these texts in my article in the Gorgias Encyclopedic Dictionary of the Syriac Heritage. But again, I want to stress that in all of these cases, Arabic served as the bridge by which Syriac text reached Ethiopic. Thus, the life of Abraham of Kidun is the proverbial exception that proves the rule, since it was transmitted from Syriac to Ethiopic via Greek. Quite importantly for the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity, this must have occurred in late antiquity. Recall that Ethiopic translations of Greek text only happened in late antiquity, and since the life of Abraham of Kidun was translated directly from Greek, this text of Syriac origin reached Ethiopic in late antiquity. So this brings me back to my previous remarks about Guidi and Conti Rossini's proposal of Syriac influences. In my view, previous scholarship on the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity has gone down a wrong path in focusing on the ill-fated hypothesis of Syriac involvement in an alleged second Christianization of Aksum. Again, there's no evidence that connects any purported second Christianization to Syriac Christians. This is not, however, to say that there were not connections between Ethiopic and Syriac Christians in late antiquity. In fact, the famous Najran episode provides the proverbial smoking gun that there were. For those unfamiliar with this event, in the 520s, the Aksumite ruler Caleb crossed the Red Sea and interceded on behalf of Christians being persecuted in the city of Najran in the Arabian Peninsula. This is important for us because it seems quite likely that the Christians in Najran were Syriac Christians, For instance, on the slide, you see a recently discovered Syriac inscription from the area of Najran. Thus, in the so-called Najran episode, we have a certain case of contacts between Syriac and Ethiopic Christians in late antiquity. And now, with the life of Abraham of Kidun, we have arguably another connection between Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity in late antiquity. But in this case, one that is indirect, mediated via Greek. In this way, the Ethiopic reception of the life of Abraham of Kidun is representative of the connected histories of Ethiopic and Syriac Christianity more broadly. We're very often dealing with indirect connections that must be located within broader networks of contact, exchange, and circulation among Christians in the Eastern Mediterranean, not only in the medieval period, but also in late antiquity. Thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for an excellent paper with very interesting material. We're opening now the floor to conversation, questions, and comments. Feel free to jump in. Margaret, please.
Thank you for an absolutely fascinating presentation. I just want to confirm, are you saying that there is no second Christianization at all? That also, as well as the fact that it would have been by Syriacs called into question?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I told the organizers before we met that I had to cut out the most controversial 2 pages of my talk for time reasons. And it's exactly on this question. And yeah, my answer is that I think that there's also good reason to question the second Christianization in general. It was, again, 2 pages, so I shouldn't go through everything. But as I see it, the second Christianization narrative is based primarily, if not exclusively, on hagiographic narratives, which Britta has showed quite conclusively date from the earliest, from the 14th century, some not written until the 19th or 20th century. And for me, we should really reflect on using these hagiographic narratives removed centuries and centuries from the Aksumite period to talk about a second Christianization. So for me, I also don't hold to a second Christianization narrative. I think that there's all sorts of difficulties there. The one thing I would add is, in this regard, I think that in Ethiopic studies, we've been a bit careless in reading a bunch of evidence through these hagiographies. So, for instance, archaeologists will often read the dating of churches to after the second Christianization period, but they could occur at any time. There's often no good evidence at all. So when they're placed in the 5th or 6th century, this is often trying to reconcile with the hagiographies, which is, I think, the exact opposite of what we should be doing. So, yeah, but thank you so much for the question.
Well, as someone who deals with hagiography, I totally sympathize with what you're saying, and please let us know when this all comes out in print. I will look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have a paper that I should have published long ago that's called Mind the Gap, but it reflects on this question of how can we really use medieval Ethiopic sources to talk about late antiquity? And my answer is that we probably shouldn't, or at least we should be very careful in doing so. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We have three questions in a row, so it would be Rachel, Laurent, and then Albert. Rachel?
Hi, thank you for such a fascinating talk. My question relates to this Greek da and the Ethiopic equivalent sa. If we just forget about the Greek for the moment, is this a common or normal construction in Ethiopic?
Yeah, I would say having 2 in a sentence like this is a bit unusual for Ethiopic. I would say it's quite a bit rarer. And yeah, so I think it's much rarer in Ethiopic that having 2 piled up like this really strikes me as odd, I must say. And of course, I can already kind of maybe head off one of the questions coming in this direction. And that is that if the particles kind of have the same meaning, then why couldn't they just randomly occur in these places? And I think that this is possible to some degree, but to me, the placement of Greek da, maybe my colleagues in Greek will have a better sense of it, is a bit random in and of itself. That is, if we have Greek da in a text, we can explain why it's there, but we can't always explain why a da wasn't in another circumstance. And Ethiopic sa works exactly like this. So there's all sorts of places where you could have it that you don't have it. So what's really interesting is that when you, in this text, when you have a sa in Ethiopic, there's almost always a Greek da standing behind it. So how can we imagine the Ethiopic translator just picking these, not completely random moments, but out of all of the possibilities, he chooses to put sa in exactly the places we find Greek da. That's more or less how the argument goes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Laurent?
Can I talk?
Yeah.
First of all, you hear me? It's okay? Yeah.
Yes.
First of all, congratulations for these discoveries, because it's really fascinating. And thank you for giving more life to my book.
It's a fabulous book.
Yeah. Well, I have only just two remarks, although we could speak the whole day about this text. The first one is about the Greek text. There is one point you can, I don't know which text you have used to make your comparison with Ethiopic, but if you have used the text of the Acta Sanctorum, or I don't know which one, that's really not a good version. So you have to be extremely careful with the Greek text, because what has been published until now is it's not the best choice, because it's a late version. So you have to be careful that, I think I specified in my book that only few versions, like the Oxford versions or this kind of versions, are really safe, because you see big gaps. And if you want to be sure that Ethiopian is based on Greek, there are some passages which are typical of Greek. So there you have no problem. You can immediately find the family of your text. So that we can, I can show you this off, and it's quite easy to find out.
Yeah.
And the other remark would be about the transmission of Ethiopic through Greek. Have you considered a path from Syria through Egypt to Ethiopia? Because if you have noticed, Greek has, first of all, there is a papyrus which has been found in Fayum. Then you have the Christian Aramaic fragments which are from Sinai, plus all the version from Sinai and so on. So you have a whole group of Greek versions through Egypt, which may explain why it has gone to Ethiopia without going through the Arabic part. So that could be an explanation in my mind, that it has just gone on the other way. And since it has been translated very early from Syriac, it has been there already ready for Ethiopic, before it goes through Syriac literature. Yeah.
Thank you for both comments. On the first one, I've been studying your work in quite some detail. And so for the Greek text, I've basically been using Greek passages that you provide us so helpfully. So whether in your articles or in your book, because I've heeded your warning that the edition just doesn't work. So, and that way it would be nice to collaborate, of course, to have access to a better Greek version. But for my comparisons, I've relied on your book and your article basically, and ignored Asamani's text and all of the other ones. I think I cited the Asamani just as an easy shortcut. So I would love to collaborate in that way. And to your second question or remark, it's quite interesting, of course, and how the text ends up here. And I want to highlight one thing that you said, that the Syriac text was translated very early into Greek, because I had a colleague ask, why is this the proverbial exception that proves the rule? And I think that this is exactly the answer to some degree, that actually very few Syriac texts are translated into Greek. I mean, we have a few of Bardaitzen and some of this material, but there's very few. So this is one of the few Syriac texts that makes it into Greek. And then it spreads, everywhere in the Christian world. It has a wide distribution. And so I have no doubt that Ethiopians ran across it in Greek in Egypt through these connections. And it was just a well-known Greek text by this time. And I think that this is one thing to really keep in mind here, that what I'm saying is very etymological. That is, that I'm saying it's a Syriac text that passed through Greek into Ethiopic. I'm not entirely sure that's how it would be received in Ethiopic. from the Ethiopian standpoint, it's received just as a Greek text at this time, right? It's just coincidentally that it happens to have a Syriac prehistory. So yeah, thank you so much for the comments and for being here.
Thank you, Albert, and then Mara. Albert?
Albert had to leave. Maybe you can read it. It's in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Albert has a question in the chat. I have a remark about Liefatu. Must he not be Iefadu? I'm reading beautiful. Or is it an error due to a later time of language? It's in the question. It's in the chat.
I think it's fine that he didn't want to. The Fatwa works for me, I think. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but
Yeah.
I have my Ethiopic lexicon I can check, but I think we're on safe ground.
I think so. Mara, please.
Yeah, well, thank you, Aaron. This was quite illuminating. I guess I have a more general question coming from someone who knows next to nothing about translations from Greek into Ethiopian, but something more about from Greek into Syriac. So I wonder whether in Ethiopian you could maybe spot something else that some parts of Greek syntax, Greek grammar that enter Ethiopian, because you showed the position of de that corresponds exactly to essa. Is there anything else that triggers something that is odd in Ethiopian but makes perfect sense in Greek? Sorry, and if that is the case, is there anything that resembles what we know for Syriac, like a chronology of how this translation changes and change and everything? So it's a general question rather.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, I have just a couple of comments. I hope I remember them all. But one is that not near as much work has been done on Ethiopic translations as Syriac translations. So this is an important point, and it was actually the part of Alessandro Bausi's ERC grant was exactly, I think, at least this is one of the questions that they were investigating, how to separate out these chronological layers based on the language and how it might be affected by translation. So that's one point to make, but that we're not near as far along in Ethiopic studies as we are in Syriac studies. A second point to make that's greatly separates the Ethiopic situation from the Syriac situation is that with Ethiopic, we're always dealing with medieval manuscripts, almost always. Maybe the Abraham Gospels is an exception. So this greatly complicates things. That is, we don't have a 6th century translation of, by Sergius of Rashina of Aristotle. So what we have are translations that were made 5th century, 6th century, and then attested only in manuscripts in the 15th century. So we're dealing with 1,000 years of transmission history, at least. And also not only 1,000 years of transmission history, but things have changed and the language has changed, and the scribes feel completely comfortable, it seems, to update these things. So peeling away the medieval layers of these manuscripts to get at what might be Aksumite, again, this I would point to Bausi's ERC grant, which I think was directed at this. This remains, I wouldn't say impossible in the current state of things, but quite difficult. So I can give you an example just to make some concreteness. The word Alexandria is a famous example in Ethiopic studies that often in Ethiopic text, the al is separated or not found based on Arabic because of the definite article. Right, so you find things like Scandria, where the Alexandria was misinterpreted, the owl's chopped off, and you get Scandria. We find this in a lot of Ethiopic texts. We even find it in texts that were transmitted in late antiquity. So the language has been updated with the Arabic medieval form, even in these texts, because of the transmission history. So even if you have a biblical text or a translation of Cyril from Greek, you can find Scandria reflecting the Arabic word from a much later period. So it's really difficult to tease these things out, at least in the present state of scholarship. Yeah.
So the hypercorrection, it gets transmitted and turns into the rule. This is amazing.
That's right. It just turns into the Ethiopic form. So it makes it very difficult to sort all of these things out. So, I mean, I saw Jonas here, but I mean, a number of people in Ethiopic studies, I mean, there's a growing interest in how do you solve this problem of you have a text, it exists in Greek, also in an Arabic translation of Greek. So how do we sort out whether it's from Greek or from the Arabic translation of Greek? This is a very, very difficult question that none of us have an answer for, that there's various proposals of how to do it. And there's some, there's a few things that people would check here and there. But I would just like to add this essa to the conversation, because for me, their correspondence, when they correspond, you have something, because Arabic just really can't do this, as you know better than I, that it just really doesn't deal with this at all. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. Hope that was not
Thank
too
you.
technical.
Good luck, I guess.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I believe Georgia has a question.
Yeah, I do. First, thank you very much. It was fascinating and I learned a lot. The question is sort of about the other side of the line compared to the previous question, and that is, you showed us that there are some things that can be connected to Greek, and the translation seems to be quite faithful, if we can say so in a way. So I was wondering, do we have something that is specifically Ethiopic there? Do we have changes or some elements that are in Ethiopic but not in the other traditions, or it's just a very regular?
Yeah, it's a great question. Nothing immediately comes to mind because I've been focusing much more on the previous question of proving that it goes back to Greek. But that's an interesting question. I don't know if Ted would have something. Ted and I have been editing it. I don't know if Ted could think of something offhand that is more.
I think this actually goes to the Oslo manuscript. So with the first manuscript, email 7602 and 7469, what we have there seems to be quite a good, relatively pure, if we can say that, version of the Ethiopic translation from Greek. Of course, much later, as everyone was saying, and there's certainly going to be corruptions in it. But with the Oslo manuscript, there are passages of it that run basically identically to the other manuscripts, that to the extent that we can't imagine this somehow being an independent translation. However, for example, the entire introduction is rewritten. So there, for instance, it's, as Erin had mentioned, the text is called a gadol, whereas in the other manuscripts it's called a hewa, which is much more corresponding to Greek zoe. Gadol is what we find in kind of how hagiographies are termed when they're translated from Arabic, not hagiographies from the Greek period. And so, this sort of rewriting and updating and editing is in many cases because it's, because the translation from Greek is so faithful, or elements of it are so unusual in the later period that they sort of update it and revise it to make it more palatable and fit within the mainstream, more within the mainstream transmission of such material, within the late medieval period.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Fascinating.
Yeah. One thing I would add that I thought of seeing Laurent again, seeing his face, is that, of course, the problem that I'm also dealing with is that I don't have the best of Greek text in front of me. So when I see something unusual in Ethiopic, I've also been kind of setting it aside, because without a full collation of the Greek, I have no idea if it's not in the Greek, basically. So yeah, but this is something that, again, would be nice for collaboration.
I have a question of my own. If I may, just to follow up on Georgia's. So you showed our two examples where you get an Ethiopic equivalent of de, which is fine. It's telling, obviously. Is that happening systematically in the text? How is it all the des in a bad Greek edition are popping up in Ethiopic?
That's yeah. So my answer would be, yeah, basically, anytime I run into a sa in Ethiopic, there's going to be a da in the bad Greek edition. So
Okay.
yeah. So the Ethiopic doesn't consistently pick up all of the does.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but of course, the translator has a choice. That's how I see it. The translator has a choice here. But you rarely find, I don't think I found one example yet of an Ethiopic sa that isn't motivated, I would say, by a Greek da. So they just always correspond, which, you know, I mean, it's a long, not a hugely long text, but I mean, there will be examples, but the overwhelming majority, every time I run across a sa and then I go to the Greek and check, there's always a da there. And so, yeah, so it really is that one example, I would say, is not exceptional in any kind of way. I mean, of course, one example, we can explain it away, you know, I mean, it could be rather exceptional, but in this case, I really think it is representative. And I like it because you have the two, which is, I think, not that great in Greek, to be honest. And it's really not that great in Ethiopic. I mean, it's just, yeah. So in Ethiopic, well, yeah. I won't say more, but I think it's not that great in Ethiopic. In Ethiopic, it even has a slightly different meaning, often to have the two sa's like this that doesn't correspond to what's going on in Greek at all. So it can be on the one hand, on the other hand construction, which of course Greek would use manda for, so which we don't have. So anyway, it's quite interesting in this regard.
It is. Thank you very much. And did I understand correctly that the broader implication of what you are showing us is that now you need to go to all the literature that's dated traditionally to the Aksumite period and check whether that's the case, or we should throw them into the Solomonic umbrella?
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling with what the implications are. I mean, one of the important implications is that we have this movement early on. So that we've long known of Syriac texts going into Ethiopic in the medieval period, but always via Arabic. So now we have the same thing in late antiquity, but via Greek. But it is rather exceptional for the reason that I mentioned, that you just don't have many Greek texts going into Syriac. What I really like about it is that, and in my kind of, if I can step back, what I want to do with the project more broadly is to get away from this question of influence, this like unidirectional thing that some Syriac monks show up in Ethiopia and translate the Bible and introduce monasticism. I think what's going on is much more complicated and much more fitting with the TeTra seminar, that this is a question, of course, this is a question of Greek-speaking Christians in Egypt, most likely, is how this is reaching Ethiopia. And so, I mean, I can give other examples from the project, but like maybe a good one would be the Abraham Gospels, that we'll have a work package on the Abraham Gospels. For so often, the Abraham Gospels have been compared directly with the Syriac Rabula Gospels, as if some Ethiopian scribe, it's always presented like this, some Ethiopian scribe who wasn't a very good artist had the Syriac Rabula Gospels in front of him and was like poorly copying them or something. And this has all of the telltale problems for me of this influence model. What's going on in reality for our art historian colleagues among us is that there's a huge illumination program for gospel manuscripts in late antiquity. And we find very similar types of things from Latin to Armenian, to also in Syriac and Ethiopic. And we need to think about these things together in some kind of network and compare them kind of globally in this way, instead of this one-line Syriac to Ethiopic. So for me, this I like these intermediary cases because I think it fits with the larger situation, that it's not this just, you know, one line to another, Ethiopian Christians being influenced by Syriac Christians. So this case is certainly not that. So that's why I put pressure on it and emphasize it.
Very good, thank you. Andy, do you understand correctly?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. That was a fascinating talk and fascinating case as well. And I especially appreciate these kind of issues very much coming from the Armenian perspective, of course, where you have similar issues, especially in the case of Ephraim, for example, where you have to try and figure out if the translation was made from Syriac and Armenian or from Greek, which is an issue in itself. So I can appreciate that very much. But maybe I just wanted to maybe ask a more general question in the sense of what this early translation of a Greek text attributed to Ephraim, I assume it was attributed to Ephraim in Ethiopic tradition as well.
That's correct, yes.
So how does that fit into the wider question of the place that Ephraim has in Ethiopian Christianity? Because this is something that you didn't really discuss, I assume, because of a matter of time, but it might be nice for some people here just to give a kind of broader perspective on the place of Ephraim in Ethiopia?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Thanks.
it's a great question. Yeah, Ephraim is Ephraim is it was a matter of time, of course. I often start with an Ephraim example. That Ephraim has a wide reception in Ethiopia. So he's even he's said to be the author of probably the most copied, recited text in all of Ethiopic, the Wadasse Mariam. So this text is in some sources ascribed to Ephraim. Ephraim appears frequently in Ethiopian illuminations at the feet of Mary for this reason. So we have it both in manuscripts and in like wall paintings, for instance. Ephraim and Mary often occur together. And then we have a large number of texts attributed to Ephraim in Ethiopic, a sizable number. Ted and I are currently working on an article for a volume that Andy's co-editing on this topic. And it's a quite interesting kind of group of texts. And I draw a kind of a contrast with somebody like Jacob of Saruk that Ted and I have also about to finish a book on, that with Jacob of Saruk, we have a lot of Syriac text that moves straightforwardly into Arabic and then straightforwardly into Ethiopic. So we have these authentic Jacob of Saruk texts in Ethiopic via Arabic. We have a dozen of them or so, plus a number of other attributions. Ephraim's a completely different story for reasons that Andy kind of already hinted at, that he's a much broader figure in a way. So we have Ephraim Graicus and Ephraim Zerus, and we have all sorts of texts attributed to Ephraim, and these texts are coming to Ethiopic in all sorts of different ways. So we don't yet have one, Ted, correct me if I'm wrong, not yet one authentic Syriac Ephraim text in Ethiopic. We have Ephraim Graicus texts. We have authentic Syriac texts in Ethiopic that are not attributed to Ephraim in the in the Syriac tradition. Sorry, I'll say it again. So we have authentic Syriac texts in Ethiopic that are attributed to Ephraim in Ethiopic, but not in Syriac. So a bunch of Sogitha, for instance. So we have Sogyatha like this and various texts like this. So it's really interesting to think of who is Ephraim in Ethiopic Christianity, because he's a quite large figure that corresponds very little with Ephraim Zerus, at least, that there's not much Syriac Ephraim there. So even though there are Syriac texts. So yeah, this is something that how to put this all together is a kind of a quite interesting story. But I think it again speaks to this question. I like this messiness, of course, that the way to think about these things is we have to be doing various things, and Ephraim Graicus is just as important, if not more important, for this Ethiopic reception of Ephraim than the Syriac Ephraim is. And I think this is an important thing for kind of our field. And again, something that I think TeTra really capitalizes on in a really interesting way of bringing various groups of people together. So,
Thank you. Laurent?
Well, if I may add a little detail about Ephraim, it has to be noticed that in Syriac, the text is not ascribed to Ephraim. It's only in Greek and in the later versions. So it can also be a sign that the text is definitely not going from the Syriac arc,
right,
through Arabic and so on, because I have proof that it's definitely not ascribed to Ephraim now. It can be just, we don't know where it comes from, but it's a mistake.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite interesting in this regard, of course, because if I can add in that all of the, say, specific features of the text as Syriac are kind of removed. The village of Qidun is removed in the Greek version. This paragraph about Ephraim is also removed in the Greek version. So in some ways, the text is disconnected from Ephraim entirely in Greek and also in Ethiopic, which again,
they separate Ephraim from the text, but they put him as at the author, when in Syriac is a friend of Abraham, but not the author of the text.
Exactly. So so it's really interesting in this way. Yeah.
Emiliano, you are unmuting yourself. Would you like to comment on this, or you are still in transit? I'll take that as a no.
Sorry,
no.
I'm in transit. I'm in transit, and I'm probably pushed something by mistake. Sorry, but thank you very much,
No
Aaron.
worries.
That was so fascinating.
Thank you, Emiliano.
Well, on that note, unless I'm missing any raised hands, thank you to our speaker today for an excellent paper.
Yeah. Thanks again for the opportunity. It's great to see you all, and I appreciate the attendance.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
good seeing everyone.
Thank
See you
you
next
everybody
time.
for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.